Here is a question from a student. What is, in general, the purpose of mankind on earth?
That too is a profound question, and I thank you for asking it.
If you are to take all of the questions that ultimately come before you, you will find this, that they are reduced to four. There may be nuances or offshoots of them. I have concluded that fundamentally there are four. Questions of origin, questions of meaning, questions of morality, and questions of destiny. Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. And it's interesting that those four questions are somehow hinted at here. Please bear in mind one other thing, that when a question such as this is raised, it is not only for the Christian to attempt an answer. And what you have to recognize is that when you give answers to those questions, that your worldview provides the coherence for those four issues of origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. It's not good enough to be right on one and wrong on the other three. Individually, the answers must correspond to truth, and then corporately, there must be a coherence in those answers. If you follow what I'm saying, someone might give you a very clever answer on meaning, but does it tie in with that person's philosophy of origin or that person's philosophy of destiny? Aldous Huxley, for example, in his book Ends and Means, made the comment, he said, I want this world not to have meaning. I want this world not to have meaning because it frees me to my own erotic and my own political pursuits. The breakdown of meaning lent itself to an autonomous lifestyle and all the indulgence with which he wanted to live.
You can look at it different ways. You can look at it as a skeptic and say there is no purpose, you have to make it, and that's what they tell you. Stephen Jay Gould from Harvard University, the paleontologist, no meaning. Friedrich Nietzsche, no meaning. Jean-Paul Sartre, no meaning. You can see many, many skeptics in this culture who say absolutely no meaning, life is meaningless. Jean-Paul Sartre, it's an empty bubble floating on the sea of nothingness. If you're to ask a pantheist from the reincarnational viewpoint, your purpose is to pay for the karmic cycle of the previous life, and you go on and on and on and on and on till you have exhausted the karma and you get absorbed into the imperfect, impersonal absolute. To the perfect, impersonal absolute, as it were. You see, in all of those systems, there is something that is swallowed up, that you as an individual ultimately lose your individuality. Think of that. You as an individual lose your individuality. When you look at the gospel of Jesus Christ, the greatest thing He does for you as He offers you His love and forgiveness is to affirm you as an individual. The word individual comes from the Latin, which cannot be divided. You are a composite whole. You are a composite whole. One entity. And God gives you that life. He has wired you. He has made you. He has uniquely gifted you as an individual. He wants you to live out that individuality in the distinctive way in which He's made you. My wife Margie often says, I marvel at the fact that a handful of features have 1 billion different faces to them. The nose, the eyes, the lips, the mouth, different features. But that's the way we are even internally, uniquely different.
So let me give to you a summary answer. Obviously, in a few minutes, we can't give you a comprehensive one. But I was just checking through because the book was released about 3 years ago. In the second half of the book, Can Man Live Without God?, I have dealt with the question of meaning, and that was a lecture delivered at Ohio State. But let me tell you how I have approached this subject. Since it is an existential one, the logical basis will emerge in the other questions. I believe there are 4 components that a person must have in order to say my life is meaningful. Now you will have to bear with me, because as soon as I begin, you're going to say, where is he going with this answer? Because there may be a little struggle you may have with the first thought, but give me a hearing till I pull the 4 of them together. Shakespeare is the one who said in As You Like It that all the world's a stage and the men and women are merely actors. They have their entrances and their exits, and each one in his life plays many parts. He takes you from infancy to schoolboy, to soldier, to middle age, all the way to old age, saw teeth, saw life, saw everything, as he said. But after you live through those stages, you realize that there is a part that you have played, so said Shakespeare. Let me take you through 4 stages that an average human being will live through to show you how this concept of meaning emerges in the Christian life. When you are a child, when you were a child, what is it that brings a little child meaning? Because a child lives with a world of enchantment, a world of wonder, a world of enthrallment, a world that wows that little one. You can take a 1-year-old and put that 1-year-old on your lap and just press a button and a ping sound comes out of it and the child's eyes just get wide. It is getting involved with a new world, and the enthrallment is absolutely awesome to that little one. I remember talking to a very well-known Christian musician, Steve Green, and he had just become a new father. And about a year after that, when I met him, I said, "What's so exciting about being a new dad?" He said, "Watching the wow expression on my child's face whenever anything new is introduced." G.K. Chesterton and C.S. Lewis were masters at understanding the world of imagination in the life of a child. And Chesterton is the one who said that he came to more of his conclusions in life from observing children than from any volume in philosophy he had ever read. And in his book, Orthodoxy, he has an extraordinary chapter called The Ethics of Elfland. If you haven't read that book, Orthodoxy, I urge you to pick it up. I think it's one of the greatest pieces of work ever written, The Ethics of Elfland. And in that he makes this comment. He said, "Have you ever seen, when you're reading a fairy story to a child, that at some point you may read something like this? You may say, 'And the fairy godmother said to so-and-so, if you do not come back by 12 o'clock, you will become a pumpkin.'" He says, do you notice 2 things in every fairy story? Number 1, there's always a condition. If you do not come by such and such, you will become a such and such. But have you noticed the child never says to the fairy godmother, "How come?" And Chesterton says the reason is, if you say to the fairy godmother, "How come?" the fairy godmother might well turn to you and say, "If that's the way you want it, tell me how come there is a fairyland in the first place." That's the point I think God was making with Job. When Job was saying, "Only that which I can comprehensively understand in my mind will I fully accept." And God says, "All right, Job, since you want that kind of comprehensive understanding, tell me, where were you when the foundations of the earth were laid? Where were you when such and such happened?" He nailed Job with 64 questions back to back to show him that the many wonderful concepts he had imbibed, he did not have a full and a comprehensive understanding of those. This sense of wonder in childhood is vital for that child's meaning and the sense of awe that will hold that young life. We all go through that.
When Jesus was asked to illustrate what the kingdom of heaven was like, he didn't take a philosopher, he took a child. He took a little one and put the child in the middle and said, "For such is the kingdom of heaven." Bhaiyo aur bhainon, brothers and sisters, that's the marvel of the gospel. Your 5-year-old may know more about God sometimes than you and I do with all the degrees in the world. But do not ever make a mistake in not differentiating between the simple and the simplistic. That which is simplistic takes that which is complex and does away with it as if it doesn't matter. That which is simple makes it understandable within context for the moment. As the child gets older and older, it'll need more and more truth and reasons to come, more and more information to ground it in the same reasons that they believe to be true.
But that's when you come to a sudden stop at a certain stage, and you know the fairy stories are just that. They are merely fantastic. When you come into your youth, there is a second component that you look for, and that is the component of truth. How do I know what is true? how do I put my life in trust of that which is true?
There are basically at least 3 tests that any system must submit itself to: logical consistency, empirical adequacy, and experiential relevance. So when you move through the logic of it, the empirical test of it, and the experience of it, you find the consistency, the adequacy, and the relevance. Put to origin, morality, meaning, and destiny. Now, what is imperative that you and I understand is, please listen again now, when you're looking at those 4 areas, each area must individually correspond to reality as we can know it and test it. So individual statements correspond to reality, or must correspond to reality, then the system must cohere together. And obviously, if there is coherence and then there is correspondence, you've got the basic tests of truth that are applied. So when you raise a question of any other position, it is important to understand that the same question applies to the questioner also. Let me begin with just a basic philosophical idea, and after that move on to the existentially relevant arguments. You'll have to put your thinking caps on here, and if you're not particularly given to logic or philosophical thinking, please bear with me as I give this argument, because on this hinges everything else in terms of logic, empiricism, and experience. Here was an American gentleman telling me I didn't understand my philosophy, and I was trying to tell him why I was coming to the Christian faith. So as he began this verbal slugfest, I said, we're not going to solve anything at the front of an auditorium in these 15-second sound bites here. I said, but let's do something. If you take me out for a meal and you promise to pay, and I'll pray and we'll talk. He said, all right. So he came the next day with one other professor who after halfway through wished he hadn't come. But we were sitting and talking, and he tried to demonstrate for me that there are 2 kinds of logic. And actually there are more. But he said there are 2 kinds of logic, and he started to proceed with his explanation. I want you to know in about 1 hour, I'd finished my lunch, the other professor had finished his lunch, this gentleman hadn't even touched his, which was getting congealed before his eyes and ours. Every placemat within reach had been used up by him, and the waitress wondered what Martians had descended onto the scene here, and basically kept going this route. He said there are 2 kinds of logic. One is what is called the law of non-contradiction. That is the either-or logic. If you make a statement, that statement at the same time cannot, meaning the same thing at the same time, cannot elicit 2 opposite answers. The law of non-contradiction applies to logic. In other words, for a statement to be meaningful, it cannot be contradictory. He said that's the law of non-contradiction. It is either or. He said, Ravi, that is Western. I said, if you'll just cross out that last line, we can keep moving along. He said, no, I'm not going to cross out the last line. I said, sir, sooner or later you're going to have to, but if you don't want to do it now, we'll come back to it later. So then he moves on to the dialectical system, where it is both and, not either or, but it is both and. And certain systems of thought do use the dialectical system. Karl Marx did. You take the kind of the employer and the employee, bring them together to the classless society, or you've got the idea of the Hegelian dialectic there, where you take a thesis and an antithesis and put it together for the synthesis and so on. But the dialectical system, which is both and. So he says, that is Eastern. I said, please cross out that last line, and he didn't want to do it. So he said there's the either or, the law of non-contradiction, and there's the both and, which has not just an either or situation, but you have both and. So you look at one pantheist and you say, is God personal? And he says yes. You look at another pantheist and you say, is God personal? And he says no. You turn to a third one and say, which of these is right? You'll say both of them, because it is a both and system of logic. So he'd gone to great lengths to demonstrate this for me. There's an either-or system, which is Western. There's a both-and system, which is Eastern. And you cannot use the either-or when you're studying the Eastern philosophy and so on and so forth. After he'd finished, I said, sir, I just have one question for you, and that is this. So put that philosophy here in the middle. Let's mark it P. And what you're saying is this. When I'm studying this particular philosophy, I either use the both-and system or nothing else. Is that right? I either use the both-and system or nothing else. Is that right? He had just started to eat. And he put his fork down, and you know what he said? It was worth my trip all the way to the West Coast. He put his fork down, and to the utter chagrin of his colleague, he says these unforgettable words. He says, the either or does seem to emerge, doesn't it? I said, yes, sir. In fact, I got some absolutely shocking news for you. I said, even in India, we look both ways before we cross the street. It is either the bus or me, not both of us. So I said, what I'm trying to say to you is, it may be Eastern in its propensity and usage, and this may be Western in its predisposition and usage. But the fact of the matter is, you must use that which best reflects reality. I said, the very fact that you've spent all this while trying to argue me out of this system is demonstrating for me that you're using the either-or in which to prove the both hand. Now, if the law of non-contradiction applies to reality, and if the same sentence at the same time cannot elicit two opposite answers, you must submit to one conclusion. Jesus was making a most reasonable statement when he claimed exclusivity. You may say he was wrong, but he was making a most meaningful statement, because truth by definition is exclusive. Truth by definition is exclusive. The very fact is proven if you choose to challenge what I am saying. At that moment, you are actually refuting what I'm saying and saying not what I'm saying is right, but what you are saying in the process. And that's why Aristotle said, I can prove that law to you. All you've got to do is open your mouth and say something.
And what is it that brings life meaning? We can go through the days of infancy with wonder, but then we've got to find out what is true. Who made me? Why am I here? What is the purpose of my life? Thirdly, it is the sense of love and belongingness. Wonder, truth, love, and belongingness. But let me just say this, that sense of belongingness is so real, and that longing for belongingness is a hunger imprinted upon our hearts. If there was anything the story of Princess Diana told this world, it was the longing for acceptance and the longing to find love. And if it was anything Mother Teresa's life told us, it was the love and acceptance she gave to the most destitutes on the streets and gave them a sense of belongingness. We hunger for this. Even Bertrand Russell said, out of the three great longings in his life, this one was the most unfulfilled, the longing for love and the longing to belong. So what brings life meaning? The three components I've given to you: wonder, truth, love, and lastly, security when we get to old age. In our infancy, the sense of wonder. In our youth, the understanding of truth. In our middle years, the experience of love. And in our old age, the confidence of security. And we have found out through life that many of the things we give to each other as security do not really add up to much. We want a beyond, something that goes beyond these 80 years and 10.
What is the purpose of life? The purpose for which God has made you is to understand the sacredness of your life and the sacredness of worship. So let me give you this definition given by Archbishop William Temple. Worship is the submission of all of our nature to God. It is the quickening of conscience by His holiness, nourishment of mind by His truth, purifying of imagination by His beauty, opening of the heart to His love, and submission of will to His purpose. All this gathered up in adoration is the greatest expression of which we are capable. In other words, life is diverse. Its ultimate expression is one. Quickening of conscience by His holiness, mind by His truth, imagination by His beauty, heart to His love, and submission of will to His purpose. All this gathered up in adoration is the greatest expression of which we are capable. Now here's the analogy I want to give to you. In marriage, you see that pristine analogy. A man and a woman in a consummate relationship of the sacredness of marriage. The word, the body, the action, the life, the meaning, everything in one expression. That's why they say the two shall become one. In Christian ceremonies, for example, the 2 lit candles, light one, 2 are put out, the 1 candle stands. There is an intermeshing of 2 lives, the 2 in a sense seeking to live for the other. That is merely symbolic of what God does in you when He comes to live inside you and changes your hungers. You see, in the worldview of reincarnation that you've represented, the ultimate goal is union with the divine. There's one capital I, there is no you. Diversity is obliterated, some form of impersonal singularity remains. In the Christian faith, there's unity and diversity and community. As you are relating to God, the goal is not union, the goal is communion. Now, when you start from that, God Himself, the being of Trinity, love in relationship. Let me repeat that. Love in relationship. The goal of life must be to reflect that person of God in a loving relationship, first with Him, and then with our fellow human beings. When you have love and when you have relationship with God, that supreme purpose is filled, and out of the overflow, you love your fellow human beings. That's why He said the greatest commandment was to love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and strength and mind, and your neighbor as yourself. Love with that capital L, represented in the person of God, shown in the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Communing with you, that begins to give you the purpose of life. That is the generality from which the particularities actually follow. If you understand this, you will understand the mess we are in today. Take the whole issue of gay marriages. The world is now wrestling with it. And whatever one might think, I want to say this to you. When you desacralize sexuality and the body, you will desacralize life itself. Race is sacred. Sex is sacred. You cannot desacralize race. You cannot desacralize sexuality. You have to tell me, man, how you treat race as sacred and desacralize sexuality. You have to tell me that. When God gave us the 10 Commandments, you shall have no other gods before me. Worship is sacred. You shall not commit adultery. Sexuality is sacred. You shall not steal. Property is sacred. Remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. Time is sacred. Honor your father and your mother. Your home is sacred. Do you know the greatest gift God has given to you is to tell you that you are a sacred individual, inviolable? And your purpose is when you find that sacredness with Him. Listen to what the Apostle Paul said in Acts 17. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples made built by hands. He's not served by human hands as if He needed anything, because He Himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. From one man He made every nation of men that they should inhabit the whole earth, and He determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. Please listen now. God did this so that men would seek Him and perhaps reach out for Him and find Him, though He is not far from each one of us. Every race and every ethnic group is a gift of God to that person. Whether you're Caucasian, whether you're Oriental, whether you're Occidental, whether you're American, whether you're Canadian, whatever that race is, whether you're African American, that gift is a pure gift to you. Naturalism cannot give it. Reincarnational processes do not give it. It's God's pristine gift to you as an individual. When you find the sacredness of your life and your individuality blending with His and worshiping Him, the sanctity of worship, the sanctity of the Word, the sanctity of life, the sanctity of time, the sanctity of property, then we look at our fellow man as a fellow sacred human being.
The older you get, the more it takes to fill your heart with wonder, and only God is big enough to fill it. Meaning comes from wonder, truth, love, and security. And God, who's the perpetual novelty, who gave us a Son, who's the way, the truth, and the life, who loved you and gave himself for you on the cross and says, because I live, you shall live also. That's when meaning comes in, when these four components deal with the questions of origin, meaning, morality, and destiny, and bring that coherence into your life.
God planned where you would be born, and He is not far from any one of us. Your purpose is to know Him and make Him known. From that, everything else flows. Thank you for that question.